Hello everyone and welcome to the first in our five-part national webinar series addressing the fundamental issues and opportunities of Canada's EV charging infrastructure. I'm Nino Di Cara, founder of Electric Autonomy Canada, and with this national discussion series we're bringing together speakers from across the country to share their knowledge and best practices, and also to problem solve some of the significant challenges ahead. I'm delighted to introduce the first episode in this series, which is on how we achieve secure, fast and reliable charging infrastructure and successfully adopt the new NACs connector across Canadian networks. This episode is sponsored by Flow EV Charging.
We're right there, right at the tipping point, where what once seemed novel is now natural. Where reducing our carbon footprint is perfectly aligned with a smarter, smoother way to get around town or out of town. As governments and manufacturers support the move to zero-emission vehicles, Flow is helping accelerate adoption with some of the most reliable, most complete charging solutions on the market. Drivers everywhere are going with Flow. At home, at work, and at almost 100,000 charging stations across North America, each of which are engineered to handle the heat and weather the cold, which means drivers can rely on Flow to connect them to the energy they need, powering the world towards a more promising future.
We're grateful to Flow EV Charging for their support of this discussion. Well, with EV adoption rates climbing, new owners of electric cars are less likely to be early adopter enthusiasts and are more likely to be less familiar with EV charging infrastructure, as well as less familiar with how to make it work and what to expect from it. So it's never been more vital for charging networks and site hosts to deliver a simple, reliable and hassle-free experience. The questions we'll explore in today's webinar panel are: how can the EV industry meet and exceed user expectations at charging stations? And how seamless can we make the adoption of the North American charging standard now that so many automakers have committed to roll it out in 2025? And we have a tremendous panel of speakers who have stepped up to talk about this. And they are Jeff Dion, Senior Director, Product Line Management at Flow EV Charging; Alejandro Orellano, EV Charging Manager at Ford Motor Company; Louise Levesque, Policy Director at Electric Mobility Canada; Brent Hartman, Director of Fuel and Transportation at CSA Group; and my colleague, Emma Jarrett, Executive Editor of Electric Autonomy, who will be moderating today's discussion. Well, we've had over 300 people register for the event today, and we've already had many awesome questions submitted by the audience during the registration process. But we'd still love to hear your questions from the audience in the live Q&A function. Please use the Q&A box in the bottom right of your screen, and Emma and the panel will get to as many of them as possible. You can also upvote questions that other people have asked there. If you're not asking a question, you can add a comment in the chat box and engage with other attendees in the audience. So comments in the chat and questions in the Q&A. And with that, over to you, Emma, to start the conversation.
Thanks very much. Lovely to be here with you all this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time today to join us. You may recall last year we did a charging series, again, a five-parter, looking at all the various aspects of the charging landscape in 2022. So a year later, I think we're in a much different position than we were. So Louise, could you kick us off by giving us an industry-wide look, particularly at the psychology of who EV drivers are now today and what their potential drivers will be and what their expectations are of the charging experience and how it should work and feel for them?
Yes, thank you so much, Emma. As we move away from the relatively patient and tolerant and collaborative early adopters, the next wave of EV drivers will have much higher expectations and much lower level of tolerance for technical problems or minimalist installations. So I think the criteria goes like this. Number one, reliability. Under that, I include working charging stations, of course, compatible connectors, site maintenance, clear and easy operating instructions, and a customer hotline for help. Then comes what I call charging options. We need multiple charging stations per site, multiple charging sites in more dense areas, of course, both of which will reduce the risk of having to wait and also having to go to another site because one charging station isn't working. If you have multiple, then there's other nearby. Multiple charging speeds per site. It doesn't always have to be super fast. Sometimes you need a lower level or you want to stay longer. So it's nice to have different options. Finally, I group together convenience and security. Restrooms nearby, ideally 24 hours is great. Safe and well-lit site, and also nearby convenient shopping options. With the growing use of charging stations, the business case will bring networks, and we're already seeing that. Networks are going to upgrade their sites. They want more people using their charging stations because that's where the business is good, and you have people shopping in the boutiques nearby. And as EV drivers have more options, they will be choosing the best sites. And I think that that's how the industry will evolve towards a better EV charging experience for everybody.
And just a quick follow-up, do you think that the industry is going to evolve organically? Or do you think that there's going to be a catalyst that triggers a change to adjust to new consumer expectations?
Yeah, well, I think that customer feedback and, the competitive side of it will be part of it. But at some point, I think private investors and maybe government investors, to ensure that these sites will be profitable, might at some point link certain criteria to their investments. And that can probably help accelerate the transition to better charging experiences.
Great, thanks. So, Jeff, I'm going to lean on you for the charging network perspective on this. And, speaking to the strategies flows adopting to meet changing customer demands or consumer demands. And actually, if you've noticed anything that you want to add on to what Louise has pointed to already, and we will go from there.
Yeah, well, Louise said a lot of the very important thing. The early adopters were very much nice to the industry in our early days. They accepted a lot of compromises. It was not easy for an EV driver in the early days to make their way day to day and on travel, trying to find station and navigate. But those days are gone. It's not good enough anymore. And now that the OEM have ramped up, started new factories, and we see more models, a lot more of the mass adoption is happening. So a lot of person that did not think about owning an EV 2-3 years ago are now getting one. So that is really, to me, the big trigger and that need of moving into what we could refer to as a pyramid of the needs. As Louise pointed out, the basic one is it needs to work. It needs to work all the time. All that uptime, that reliability is a strong foundation we need to have. But beyond that, we need to create good experiences. People have good experiences in many of their other aspects of their life, and they get attached to these good experiences. And these good experiences go way beyond the charger itself. It includes, as pointed, the site itself, amenities, all different options that you have, multiple speed. But that whole experience can start also from the moment you're sitting in your car and you're about to go charge. So you need to think of it as a multi-step from the moment you trigger a desire to go charge, navigating, finding that charger, and be able to select a charger that offers all those other complementary needs. That's how I see a little bit of that trigger from those basic needs that are yet still partially resolved, but moving into something that flow is hard, is pushing a lot, is creating that full ecosystem of being able to climb into that ladder of needs.
Great. And I mean, I don't think anyone can have a conversation today about charging without talking about the introduction of the North American Charging Standard, or NACS or NACs. Any of the above works. So how has that influenced Flow's plan for the future? Do you think it will ultimately lead to that leveling up the charging experience that consumers are looking for?
I think it's part of a recipe that can help increase the experience. For now, the NACs is certainly more of a connector. It can bring more experience. We need to do more than that. But as of the standardization effort, it's really on the connector itself. That does bring benefits in terms of handleability and size. But we need to think about that larger experience. And not too long ago, that connector was proprietary. There's a need to build that full supply chain and also standardization around this connector. So for now, NACs is still something in the work. We need to make it J3400. It's not there yet, but all these same components of safety, of uniformity, that you're sure that it's going to work from one manufacturer to the other one, and that you're not to be worried, is something we need to tackle as an industry. And then we need to create that full experience above it, so that an EV driver knows that if he has an NACs, he has a CHAdeMO or a combo, he'll be able to find a station, know that the station is going to offer the charging that he needs for his own needs, basically.
Great, thanks. So Alejandro, just following the NACs line of thought, obviously Ford was one of the OEMs that was very early in saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to start building these ports into our vehicles. So could you walk us through Ford's line of thought when it came to deciding on NACs, and why the company thinks it will be net benefit to all of its EV drivers?
Yeah, that's a good question, Emma. And thank you again for inviting me to the webinar. And just following up what Luis and Jeff said, access to a reliable public charging network is essential and critical for the mass adoptions of EVs, especially right now that we're at that time that different O&Ms and the market itself is working towards the mass adoption. And we understand that right now the challenges that establishing and maintaining a reliable public charging networks, it's happening right now, and we understand, and we've received feedback from our customers, from EV drivers. And that's why we at Ford, and we are fully committed with the electrification of our fleet, and also to provide the best possible experience to our customers. We announced earlier this year to adopt the NACs charging standards moving forward, and for many reasons. So we see that NACs offers different advantages. For example, the ergonomics of the connectors itself, they are like much smaller, lighter, and easier to handle. Even they are more elegant. The design is more elegant compared to others like CHAdeMO and CCS. And overall, they just offers a better customer experience to the drivers. That's why, at this point, Tesla, that's using the NACs connector, is one of the leaders, if not the leader, in public charging networks right now. That besides the actual performance itself, NACs connectors offers higher performance and are capable of faster charging or higher currents compared to, for example, CCS. So as I mentioned before, with all these advantages and all, in order to provide a better customer experience, we are leveraging this partnership with Tesla. And we were as you know, the first O&M company that came to an agreement with Tesla, because we believe that this is the best connector available in the market. And we're gonna, and following our transition to NACs, it's coming very soon. We're going to start, first of all, offering adapters of Tesla adapters, NACs adapters from CCS to NACs to our customers by early next year, and targeting Q1, Q2 next year. That will allow our customers to easily plug their Ford cars to any Ford Tesla supercharging station in the US and in Canada. And thinking about the long term, Ford is also transitioning to install NACs charging ports in our vehicles from the next generation of EVs. And our target and our plan right now, we'll start offering charging ports in our cars by 2025. So that doesn't mean that we're going to walk away from CCS. That, like mentioned before, there's a transition process at a period from CCS to NACs. And we understand it's not an easy transition, but we're committed and working on it. And just allowing like our chargers or our customers to use Tesla's charging network, the superchargers, that these additional chargers will be added to our Blue Oval charging network that will make our network one of the largest O&M charging network in North America. Right now, we make an announcement not long ago announcing that with the addition of Tesla superchargers and other 3 networks that join our network, we have over 100,000 chargers available for customers in the US and Canada. So we see in the big picture lots of benefits for improving the customer experiences and just to make charging itself easier for everybody.
Thanks. Brent, I just want to grab your thoughts on NACs before we move on. But, last year you were on this panel, similar panel to this, and we were talking about the need for a Canadian charging standard. Is that something that would bring that consistency to the marketplace that everyone else has alluded to on this panel? So is this the solution? Is NACs the thing that's going to bring that reliability level up and standardize this experience? What did you think when you saw that development?
Sure. Yeah, so we obviously have a long history at CSA and electrical safety standards for charging equipment. So obviously following the development closely. And over the last few years, we've had consistent feedback from our members about the need to standardize aspects that impact customer experience. So we have not heard anything has changed since the NACs development, not to say that won't help with reliability, but I think what NACs does do is it underscores really that need to continue to find ways to standardize the customer experience. So Jeff really noted this as well. So I think NACs should help grow the market, but there will be, I think, those continued questions about safety, security, reliability, availability, interoperability, accessibility, and standards can still play a role in those. So I think you will need standards playing that role to document the minimum safety and performance requirements. And standards also serve as the tools for conformity to industry and regulatory requirements. So some examples here, the charger connector designs, those will still need to be evaluated for safety. Charger uptime and performance will likely need to be monitored on an ongoing basis, and there might be government or user requirements related to charger uptime and performance. And data security might need to be maintained and potentially assessed. So, whether they're existing or new market participants, there's going to need to be requirements in place through standards, and those can be updated and refined over time. So I think, overall, I think NACs will help streamline some of the variability in charging equipment design and performance. But CSA and other standards developers, I know SAE's been mentioned, we will continue to work on various aspects to support standardizing the customer experience, both from that perspective as well as from maintaining safety requirements to support EV charging.
Thanks. I'm gathering from the comments that one of the standardizations people would like to see is a roof over charging stations. All right. So, Jeff, just to ping back to you quickly and grab your thoughts on what Brent's been saying about, standardizing the charging experience. And I was on a panel a little while ago with Louis Tremblay, which is Flow's founder, just for those who don't know. And the distinct impression I walked away from that panel was that reliability is the first and last thing that Louis thinks about when he's going about his day. So, when you're looking at the industry now, factoring in that NACs is now a reality that everyone has to deal with, do you think there's still a place for that standardization piece to formalize it, really?
Absolutely. We're really a multi-actor, if not multi-stakeholder industry. Just on this panel, we have OEM, we have network, we have government, we have standard. We can think of EV driver, and I don't want to list everyone, but even in the charging industry, we have network, manufacturer of hardware. So all of these actors need to be aligned, and then standard really comes very handy at multiple stages of the industry. We're in that phase where it becomes very critical. It was maybe tougher in the early days. We don't want to slow too much the process of innovation, but at one point, if you want to be sure to serve the mass market, it needs to be efficient. You cannot have multiple ways to communicate between all of them, and you can not always bring new risk between each communication. So it's clear that standard have a great way of streamlining this, making sure that the right people sit at the same table and work on building that base foundation of making sure that it works all the time.
Great, thanks. And Brent, just one more quick follow-up. For the, we always look to places that have done it right, basically saying, can we copy this? We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Are there places in the world that have adopted an EV charging standard comparable to the ones that CSA Group is looking at that could be used here, or how's it going there? Do we have anything to compare to?
Yeah, I mean, the standards landscape is always relatively complex, especially when you're looking internationally in different jurisdictions. Maybe to note, there are probably two key work items that CSA has on the go primarily relevant to the discussion here today. So one is a kind of a broad guideline for EV charger deployment, and that touches on some of the aspects mentioned earlier: reliability, interoperability, safety, things like that, providing a general guideline for those interested in deploying EV chargers, because not everybody is very familiar with how to actually deploy the charging equipment if they're having a fleet or if they're a consumer interested in purchasing a vehicle. The other standard is a specific EV reliability standard. So kind of back to the guideline quick, the broad guideline for EV charger deployment. We did start working on that. We were advancing it primarily as a guideline for Canada. We were asked to explore expanding it to include the US. Maybe for those on the webinar that aren't familiar, CSA is accredited to develop standards in both Canada and the US, which we often do because it's beneficial for the transportation sector, where obviously vehicles cross borders and you need to be able to refuel regardless of what jurisdiction you're in. So as we've been looking at those various requirements for safety, performance, interoperability, reliability, obviously one thing that has come up is the US Department of Transportation's National EV Infrastructure Program. There are some similar requirements through that program, including for reliability. So right now, those requirements are really specific to DOT funding and what they're deploying. But CSA and our working group looking at the guidance document are highly interested in monitoring those requirements and how they play out in the US and what lessons learned we might take, whether for Canada or if this does turn out to be a binational, to expand beyond, just DOT programming. So just on the other work item, specifically on EV reliability, CSA and our members continue to see a role to expand on this initial guidance document, which is going to cover various topics. Oh, sorry, a little light downtime here. And so in particular, we think there are opportunities for, EV charger reliability, right? We know that's a key topic. We can provide some general guidance, but we think there needs to be a specific standard to look at, defining specific terms, looking at different factors for reliability, whether it's hardware, software, or environmental, determining acceptable levels, coming to consensus on measuring and monitoring reliability and who it might be reported to. And then back to your question about looking at other jurisdictions, thinking about how that standard might harmonize, whether with the US or maybe more globally. And certainly we'd want it to be harmonized across Canada. So that's some of the issues that we would like our committee to kind of look at to help shape the future of a EV charging reliability standard. So yeah, I think we'll continue to address this. And to your point, yeah, we are always actively looking at what's going on in other jurisdictions to help inform the work that we do.
Yeah, that cross-border piece needing to be in sync with the US is, I don't think, talked enough about, or at least I don't talk about it enough. But it's obviously critical to this. So thank you for highlighting that. Just to our audience, please put your questions in the queue. I can see you're very active and you know, it's great, but definitely make sure you get them in because we are approaching the Q&A period of this. So Louise, you've been very patiently listening to all of this and, you know, I'm sure taking it in and also probably reviewing the chats that are going on from the viewers. Collating all the information, aside from standards, are there things that you would like to see or that you know drivers would like to see charging networks do to meet or exceed their expectations? Are there successful examples you can point to? Any good stories you can share?
Yes, of course. And what I'm going to address here is it's not necessarily always the network's job. As Jeff mentioned, this is a multiple stakeholder industry. We talk about site operators, which is not always the same thing as the network. So yeah, I'd like to see, I think EV drivers more and more will like to see things added to the experience around the charging station. You mentioned the canopy. I love those when we have one of those nearby or above the charging stations. Installing accessible charging stations for people with disabilities, that's really coming through and needs to come through faster. Making sure that the networks are covering also remote and rural areas, not just the, you know, I want my network to be able to be used. I want to charge in those more remote areas that I visit sometimes. And aside from that, there are other perks that I've seen, and I'll mention some examples. Picnic tables, a dog park next to the charging stations. We're seeing that more and more. That's really great. Waste bins right next to the charging station. Please, that would be really nice. Yeah, and some charging stations also have a windshield washer refill station, which is really great, you know, and a little squeegee, so we don't have to drive our EVs up to the gas pumps to wash our windshield. So those are all extras that are part of the overall charging experience. A few examples that I can point to in between Trois-Rivières and Montreal, there's a rest area that's called Halte Point du Jour with multiple charging stations. This is reaching out to some of the earlier criteria I mentioned. 24-hour restrooms, a dog park. There's little picnic tables with canopies. There aren't canopies near the charging stations, but at least a little area aside there. That's great. I was traveling in New Brunswick this summer. Irving Big Stops have, I think it's partly with Tesla superchargers, but there are also DCFC stations. But yeah, there's, you know, restrooms and 24 hours. Great installations there and multiple places throughout the province. That's really great. And the last example that I can point to is the IGA EcoCharge installations here in Quebec. So you've got the supercharger and other types of charging, the eco-charging stations with different levels of power and those windshield washer refills. So yeah, I could point to easy payment options, and finally maybe roaming capability, being able to go from one network to another with simple payment options.
Thanks. So I want to pick up on something you said that is related to this topic of exceeding consumer expectations, but that is in a bit of a gray area right now. And that's who is responsible in many cases for a charging station and their place in the world. You know, who fills up the squeegee buckets? Who is going to make sure that the garbage is emptied at these stations? I mean, I'm thinking less about ones that are kind of already on existing gas stations, because I've been on those before, particularly out on the East Coast. That's kind of how they've organized it there. But in these ad hoc charging station situations, who takes care of it? Whose responsibility is that?
Yeah, that's why I mentioned earlier in my response there that it's a multiple stakeholder, and of course, and I suspect that some of the earlier charging stations had no garbage cans, because you have to plan for emptying those garbage cans if you put one nearby. So they're the site operators, and I think that the network, when they're signing up, maybe Jeff can complete on this. I'm sorry, but how does it work? Who's responsible and who checks up after? If there's a client complaint about this, they're going to call the network, but it might not be the network's fault. If, I don't know, the snow, you can't get to the charging station because there's a big snowbank. So, yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, I'd love to bring you in on this and get your thoughts on who is responsible for charging stations once they're in.
Exactly. It's a mix. It's a dual relation. There's that site owner. There's the network operator, and yeah, at the end of the day, it's always thinking about the EV driver. So it's thinking of those things in advance. It's not just a self-attended kiosk, a charger. Those other part of the experience need to be agreed on prior to signing any deal with the site host, making sure that they think of that and they perceive the value. Because if a customer shows to their own charger sitting on their lot, they get that better experience. They're more likely to come back, and it's probably better for their other business that might be running on that specific site. So it really comes in as first acknowledging, thinking that it goes beyond installing a box in the parking lot, and be listening to the EV driver. And as pointed earlier, the early days got us where we are. We learned a lot, but it's not enough for the future. We need to keep on listening to those new EV driver and adapt all these solutions.
Yeah, in my mind, that may be a really key takeaway from this is, to jump forward to the next level of the EV charging experience, that relationship between network operators and site hosts, that really needs to be invested in and made sure that everybody is working in sync together. I don't know if you agree with that or not. That's to you, Jeff.
Sorry. Yeah, I fully agree. It's as I said, it's not, you should not stop your reflection about just bringing a charger on board and having the rest of it done by itself. It's really committing to the effort of your customer that will show there. That can be new customer for your business. It can be recurring, and certainly a Flow network like Flow, a charging network like Flow is certainly offering these kind of services for our site hosts, and we can go into shoveling sites and cleaning and doing these. And one of our best example for this is the city of New York. Is we do all of these services, and that's how we get 99 point something uptime and reliability with one of the highest score of all of our chargers. So people perceive that, and they really do like these chargers and always come back. So it's really a commitment about the network being there for the site host, hiring these details prior, not just selling a charger and going to the next cell available.
Thanks. So Alejandro, do you want to build on Louise and Jeff's comments, canvassing not only the relationship between site hosts and charging networks or charging network operators, but also any feedback that Ford has gotten from current or prospective EV drivers about their amenities that they expect at charging stations that would keep them coming back?
Yeah, the comments that rest of panelists made are very very important, very interesting. I think we're all aligned that those are the better amenities you can have around the charging stations, that you will attract more customers. My point of view, and we believe that the charging itself is the most important amenity overall. If the charging works and it's operational, and if you see good reviews online that the charger is actually working, you will see more customers or more drivers going to the site. If you see bad reviews, for example, in Blockshare about the charger, they won't go to those sites. They will just no way, I'm going somewhere else. So I think right now, for example, working with Ford and Model E and the launching of Model E program and installation of fast chargers with our dealerships all over across Canada, our dealers will see the benefits of installing the fast chargers, the public chargers, and they will see the benefits and the short and the long term once they see higher traffic going to the dealerships and see the chargers are actually operational, they're actually working. It's like a learning curve for any new dealer right now. They want to install a charger. They will see the benefits in the short and the long term, and building on that learning curve, they can add more amenities around the charging or around the dealership to make it more attractive to new customers, right? So I think the charging itself should be considered like a valuable asset, and for any new installation or property owner, for us in this case, with our dealerships, right now we're working with in the Model E program. There are over or almost 300 dealers, Canadian dealers, that are enrolled in the Model E program that is launching early next year. So we're very excited that once all these chargers are up and running, we will we'll add value to the current charging public charging network, and we'll offer a better experience to our customers.
Yeah, like I can almost see you frantically writing down a note. Tell all 300 to put them under canopies. All right, great. Well, I want to make sure that we have loads of time for audience questions. So with everybody's approval, we're going to pivot into that. So let's start. I think, Jeff, you're probably the most appropriate person to answer this, but anybody who has a comment, please jump in. First question is, utility demand costs account for 60 to 80% of the operational cost for level 3 sites. Often the demand costs are double the energy costs. With current charging pricing, these sites are break even at best. Are we forced to increase pricing to get profitability, or is there a way to drive down demand? Please don't say batteries. There are too many needed and they're too costly. So Jeff, does that fall in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, sure. I can have a first try at that. And it's absolutely right. These extra charges that are caused sometimes by just only one or two vehicle in a short period of time can be a business killer for someone trying to operate a charger. There'll be multiple ways it can be addressed. We've discussed the multi-stakeholder industry, so of course utilities themselves have a role to play in this, being part of the adoption, being part of the decarbonization of the grid, and investing in renewable energy is a part for them. They can have special tariffs or classification for EV charging. Some provinces or utility did adopt that. So having them at the table to discuss these rates is one. Of course, as adoption increase, the more EV that are on the road, the more are using the station, the better these chargers get absorbed, and that the equipment is not, let's say, oversized for some much newer vehicle that are more capable in terms of power compared to the actual legacy of vehicles. So it's an effort. It's about also adjusting prices and adjusting in terms of demand. So it's again sitting around maybe energy standard and making sure that utilities share their point of view, charging network, and also EV driver in there.
Thanks so much.
I saw something lately. Don't know. I think it's maybe early but I noticed that Tesla superchargers now have demand pricing. So it's more expensive in higher demand periods than in lower demand periods. So I'm anxious to observe how that will go. Is that a way that they're putting, I'm not, I don't know. I'm just sharing. It's something that I noticed lately. And they might be trying to divert, usage to different hours, and while at the same time offsetting the cost of those demand charges. So that might be maybe some sort of thing to look at.
Thanks. All right. So just a point of clarification. We very helpfully had one of our viewers just make a comment in light of some of the questions and chatter that she's just clarifying that NACs is only a form factor or connector geometry. NACs does not specify any proprietary communication protocols or other design aspects beyond the connector geometry. So just putting that out there to preface our next question, which is to Alejandro. So Tesla drivers have great connection at superchargers because it's seamless through the Tesla app. How can Ford guarantee the same seamless experience for Ford drivers at superchargers? Is Ford willing to let Ford drivers use the Tesla app?
Good question, Emma. So yeah, at this point, like we're working on all the technicality with Tesla, how to make the interoperability of our 4-pass app with their connection to their charging network. So right now, the plan is to use for our drivers, for customers to use the 4-pass app to connect or charge to use this charging network, Tesla chargers. So it's still a work in development. Hopefully, we'll get that result in the next coming weeks or months, or before our launch in early next year. So the plan is to use our 4-pass app for accessing and for charging or using the charger, Tesla chargers.
Great. All right, Brent, I'm excited to hear your response to this. All right. Why can't public charging networks be as reliable as gasoline stations?
It's a good question. I think back to kind of the standardization issue, right? I mean, we're starting to, I think, seeming to rally around a single connector type, which, obviously is not a challenge for the gasoline industry. And I would also note some of the other alternative fuels, natural gas vehicles early on focused on a, uniform standardized connector type through CSA NGV1, and the hydrogen vehicle industry as well through SAE J2600 early on, kind of came together and focused on the connector type. So, kind of back to the NACs layer on this discussion, that's seems to be a good development, as particular from a standardization perspective, right? I think oftentimes when people hear that I work in standards and work with electric vehicles, that's the first question I'm asked. When is there going to be a single connector type for electric vehicles? So, I mean, that's sort of what jumps right to people's minds when they hear about standardization and electric vehicles. So, I guess just putting the NACs lens on, that's sort of my perspective from a standardization perspective. And then, just highlighting some of the points I made earlier that, some of these other aspects, reliability, availability, interoperability, I think over time, right, we can develop more standards and make it clear to industry and ultimately the consumer that we can standardize and streamline and make a consistent customer experience here.
Thanks. Louise, someone's picking up on your comments about multiple stakeholders, and their question is, what are the biggest barriers to working collaboratively on system planning initiatives with these multiple stakeholders?
I'm not sure I understand the question completely, but and maybe Jeff would. I don't want to throw it to Jeff, but I think that it comes from the initial partnership that the network operator will have with the site host. They want to have that complete experience for their clients. And those are mutual clients. It's the client of the network, client of the site host. For now, I think it's not necessarily barriers as much as a system that's an industry that's under development. We're scaling up now. Okay, in the beginning, we were testing. We had these little sites, and some of them were great, some of them were not as great. Now we're beginning, at least in Quebec, we're beginning to have options. There's choices. I'll choose the sites that I prefer because of different amenities that are around it. And so I think that the main challenge right now is that we're learning as we go, and we're getting better. We're upgrading our systems and partnerships to build better and better experiences. I don't know, Jeff, can you complete on that?
I agree with what you said. I think where it's a little bit tricky is let's say we focus on that uptime and that reliability. To the eyes of the EV driver, it doesn't matter that there's 5, 6, 7, or 8 stakeholders that need to work hand by hand, and making sure that your credit card is checked by a bank, that's confirmed by Flow, that the money goes around, and that we get the electricity from the grid and delivered to your car, and that the car accepts it correctly. At the end, it needs to work. So having those channel of communication well established, knowing how the escalation would happen if something fails. Who do I call? How do I make that loop faster? So that's one of the advantages we feel of having a role in most of these aspects. But at the end of the day, there's still a side hose that we need to bring on board. So I think that's where the challenge resides, is showing united and offering that seamless experience where we're all holding let's say a little piece or multiple piece, and we need to make it work very efficiently.
Thank you both. And Jeff, I'm going to keep you on. And I know you're only going to be able to speak to Flo on this question, but I think it's probably a concern that lots of people have who don't have NACs compatible vehicles. The adoption of NACs is great, but as we see more NAC stalls, will we see NACs to CCS or NACs to CHAdeMO adapters? People who have non-NACs vehicles still need to be able to charge.
Exact, and that's part of servicing actual and future driver. Most of the large adoption we can see is 2025 from the announcement of the different OEM. So equipment that are there do have those CCS and CHAdeMO adapter. Flo is not stopping production and sale of the CHAdeMO and CCS combo. We'll be adding NACs as a third option. We'll shift our ratio of recommendation between how many NACs, CHAdeMO or CCS our site owner should be offering. But the plan is not to put those charger out of service, at least for now, because those EV drivers deserve to be able to charge. So it's very easy to get overexcited and think about only the future with NACs, but there'll be existing stations that are offered. There'll be future stations that are offered still with the non-NACs, and there'll be also option where multiple connector can be served by a single station.
Thank you. And Alejandro, there is a part two to this question. Are any OEMs who installed CCS and CHAdeMO ports on their vehicles up until the time they switched to NACs going to make available retrofit units to convert them, like an aftermarket part?
At this point, there are no, that's a good question. But at this point, I cannot make comments about that because it's still a work in progress, a work in development. We're not planning like for the short term to make that step. All the until 23, 24 model years will have the CCS connectors charging port installed in their cars, and not until 2025 model year we're going to install the NACs charging port in our new generation of vehicles. But doing that retrofit, it's at this point it's not in our plans, but it's a good question, and it's worth to consider it like for the short term.
Thanks. I'm not sure who this would be most applicable for, so anyone can jump in. What indicators can we use to deem whether a charging service provider is NACs ready? And is this something consumers should be looking out for?
Can have a first try. I think most of the charging network are in a very similar place. Few months ago, it was a proprietary standard that was open. So the full expertise and knowledge of the charging network and charger manufacturer needs to be built. There's a full supply chain ecosystem that needs to start building those NACs or J3400 parts. So there needs to be adaptation to the connector. There needs to be supply chain that start manufacturing these, adapting these, onboarding these. So I think for now, certainly every charging network is probably looking at this, but as of today, it's mostly still a Tesla available connector, with everyone trying to come with the second solution to be able to offer more. And that's where I think there's place to distinguish between charging network and how they're going to approach that beyond just offering a new connector, referred a little bit earlier as a new geometry.
Great. Did anybody else want to add to that? No? Okay. All right. So sorry, I've got questions going in two different spots. So Alejandro, I think this is most applicable to you. Are dealers entering into partnerships with gas companies like Petrocan, Shell, et cetera, for repurposing existing gas station sites longer term? Is that something that OEMs are considering, or dealerships?
Not at this point for like for the first phase of the Model E program launch. So we can, it's a good idea to consider, but not at this point for the first phase of the program.
Right. Thanks.
I think gas stations should all take the time to look at the market and realize that they should be getting charging stations now. And because at some point their model, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, they can still offer gas for a long time, but there are new drivers that are EV drivers, and gas stations are often very, the placement are optimal. And they often have 24-hour services and things like that. So yeah, reach out to your local network and get charging.
I could just jump in too. I know that's something we've been hearing, electric vehicles, other alternative fuels. Yeah, how do they leverage the gasoline station footprints? And, in some cases too, you sometimes see the chargers kind of tucked away and maybe not as prominent either. So that's been something we've been looking at for multi-fuel stations, like separation distances between different types of fuels. Like, are there ways to update that, or to maybe make it a little bit easier to integrate alternative fuels into existing station footprints? Because I think that would be really helpful, particularly, providing a little bit more flexibility about placement and where they might go, once again, just to try to make it prominent so that it's a nice, inviting place to go charge, right?
And Brent, I actually wanted to loop you into that point, because I have a follow-up question to that audience question, which is, does it also make sense to locate EV chargers in and around gas stations, because there are lessons from the gas industry that can be passed down, maybe not formal standards, but ways to standardize the experience, and that will be the last word for this. But I was curious about if you think there's a legacy learning that can be transferred.
So yeah, I think Louise touched on it too, right? They're placed usually prominently, and right, the location, some thought has gone into why it should be there. So I think that's the other lesson learned, right? Back to the availability, and right, they have great locations. It's once again kind of bridging that gap of familiarity for the customer experience. They're used to going to gas stations already if they have an internal combustion engine. So kind of logical to, I think, leverage that and just have consumers kind of continue what they've been doing.
Yeah, and I would add that also there's a business case there. They have to be profitable, and many of the gas stations, their main profit is not selling gas. Their main profit is the shop that's next to it, the dépanneur or the restaurant, or So and when we're charging, I rarely stop at a charging station and not buy. I'm almost every time I buy something in the store that's next, and the site operator, if they're linked to that store, they're making money on every person that comes charging. I think it's exceptional. It's if I only have a 5-minute stop, quick, or in the middle of the night or whatever, I won't go in. But otherwise, go in. I buy a sandwich. I go buy a bottle of water. Anything. So yeah, that's the business case item, and they already have that right. So yes, in a sense, there's the continuance of that commercial experience.
It's like an electric honeypot. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining the panel and for sharing your perspectives and giving a very needed 2023 update. It has felt like a very different year in terms of the EV journey. So appreciate it. I will hand it back to Nino now, and thank you all again.
Well, thank you, Emma, for moderating, and a big thank you to Louise, Jeff, Alejandro, and Brent. I think the audience put you through your paces today on quite a diverse range of issues. So thanks for being such good sports in coming along and sharing your expertise with us and the industry at large. A video recording of this discussion will be up on the Electric Autonomy YouTube channel in the coming days. I would like to once again give a big thanks to our episode sponsor, Flow EV Charging, for making this discussion possible. And also to let you know that next week, the show continues, where we have the second part of this 5-part national discussion series and another expert panel for you. They will discuss a particularly difficult topic, and that's how to advance the rollout of EV charging in condos, stratas, and MERBs. You can see the link, which is going to be popped into the chat here momentarily on this, or you can go to the Electric Autonomy website and find the link in our top navigation menu where we have an events bar there. So that's coming up next week, on next Wednesday. And in addition, when it comes to fleet electrification, Electric Autonomy has you covered. On November the 9th, we'll be hosting a fireside chat with Zinga Lucian of Element Fleet Management, a lady who has tremendous experience electrifying fleets. You can register for that event using the link at the Electric Autonomy website, and you can also see that a link has been dropped into the chat as well, just here. So thanks very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next week at one or both of these events.